All right, good a time as any to start this up. It's a little late on the jump this week. I'm always late now these days, so that's cool. But we're back here again today. Dilly boy, thing too nauseous. We're trying to drop another video for you guys, and today we're gonna talk about prophecy. Mine, we're gonna talk about prophecy. I'm gonna start a whole new line of videos where I'm gonna just talk about prophecies. I wanted to do like a bunch of them together, and then in my head I was like, you know what? Like we're gonna make it a nice little video, short. You know what I mean? Concise. People have been balling out for that. They want to see some nice short videos from Dilly Boy that they can watch, without, breaking their sort of time bankroll, if you will. But it didn't work out that way. I still decided to just take one prophecy. And I don't know who told me maybe to take this one. This is one of my favorite ones. It's the prophecy against Tyre in Ezekiel 26. And I hope it's Ezekiel 26. We go and find out just now. Anyways, so I think prophecy is really cool, man. Like I know when I was starting out my faith journey, prophecies I found very like compelling, and although it's not totally conclusive, you know what I mean. You got soothsayers and all types of people that like are telling the future. You know what I'm saying? And to a degree, some of this stuff in the world is actually real. Like and there is spiritual wisdom and knowledge that Satan and his kingdom can have as well. And so I believe that, when we see the Obiaman them and, the witchcraft worker, and when we see the people, the diviners or whatever you call them, doing stuff. There's a actually, I mean, some people are performing tricks. Some people have all kind of psychological tools that they're using to figure things out and whatnot. And so there's some people that are playing games with you, but there are some people that are tapping into something a little bit more unnatural for sure, and that exists in the world today. So I don't think necessarily that prophecy is as conclusive, but building together, looking at the just the amount of prophecies, looking at it's definitely a useful tool to like either building up your faith or to helping people to come to faith. I'm sure there's bare people who came to faith like studying prophecies in the Bible. The Bible is kind of unique in this way. Now, other religious texts claims to have prophecies and fulfilled prophecies, and maybe one day we'll look at those as well, and we'll kind of like kind of hash out what's going on there. But the Bible is unique in the sense of the sheer amount. you know I'm looking it up. I come to find out there's about 2,500 prophecies in the biblical text total. Like in total, at least over 2,500. That's crazy. That's a crazy amount of prophecy. We're not gonna go through all that, right? But we're gonna do a couple of the more cool ones and ones that have angles that we can look at that are gonna be fun for us, and informative and also beneficial for use for apologetics, or just cool for Bible study, just being good Bereans of scriptures and whatnot. And so we got prophecy to look at. Let me just say though, right? That 2,500, if you start to count hyperlinks, what I'm calling hyperlinks is sort of like all of the things that connect together, so where you go back in the text and you're like, oh, so this is why Cain was exiled from the garden, like sorry, from in his situation, because Adam was exiled from the garden. And this happens again later with Esau, where what I'm saying, or Jacob, where he's sent away, or whatever. And then you start to put together all these things. Oh, all of the you know women, and this is why God had to intervene into their to be able for them to get pregnant. It was all pointing to the Messiah who would come through, the ultimate like sort of like miraculous birth situation. And like, if you start to go down that route, you got probably like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. I would even argue you could probably continue to make hyperlinks into the probably a million to, millions of like like things that are prophetic in the scripture, if you use hyperlinks alone. But we're here to talk about Tyre today. you know, I was preparing for this and I thought it was going to be nice and short. And then the preparation went ham. Like, I don't know what happened. It was taking a lot longer. And I think I built a lot of content. We're going to see how fast we can get through this, anyways. But I don't have, I'm going to be honest with you guys up front. And I know people say don't do this. But the truth is, we're going to kind of study this together right now, because what happened is your boy was compiling this stuff, and I almost realized that I didn't have it together, and it's not ready to deliver, and it's kind of half baked right now. But I'm like, you know what? Let's do it together. Let's study this together. Let's go through it. Let's think about it, and like, you know what I'm saying? And we'll get better at it together. And it's a good way to just drop a video anyways for this week. I know that seems wild, that I'ma just go forward with it, even though it's half baked, to make sure I get a video this week. But it's cool, bro. We're all Bereans. We're all learning. We're all growing. I'd rather not skip this week or something. This week is kind of crazy, but your boy got a lot of family coming in. Shout out to y'all. You know what I'm saying? We got like a semi big-ish wedding going in. Big up to y'all. You know what I'm saying? And so, ratings, but a lot is happening. And I just realized if I don't get this pressed out, I'm not going to get it pressed out. So we're going to go through it. Let's read through the entire prophecy and like talk about it along the way. Ezekiel 26, verse 1 to 21, right? Y'all got your Bibles? Ezekiel 26, verse 1 to 21. So it says, in the 11th month of the 12th year, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me, right? Must be Ezekiel, right? So this generally is dated to about the 11th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, right? Which is around 586 or 585 BCE, 586 years before Christ, roughly around there. And that was just around the time of Jerusalem's fall to Babylon. So, by the way, Jerusalem's fall to Babylon is also something that was predicted, that God predicted and through other prophets and whatnot, right? I think it says that Ezekiel 26, which we're discussing, is often cited as a prophecy concerning the fall of Tyre, and there are other biblical passages that some interpret as predicting the fall of Jerusalem as well. For instance, Jeremiah 25, 8, 11, and Jeremiah 52 speaks of Jerusalem's destruction at the hand of Babylon, which historically happened in 586 BCE. So Daniel 9:26 refers to an anointed one being cut off, and the city and sanctuary being destroyed, which some link to Jerusalem's fall as well. And then Zechariah 14, 1 to 2 also mentions a future siege of Jerusalem, though scholars debate whether this is referring to an eschatological event, like a later day event. So there are some, support for, the fall happening here, but specifically the prophecy against Tyre here is talking about generally. It starts off telling you when this prophecy would have occurred, right? And it says, in the 11th month of the 12th year, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me, Ezekiel, right? And so it's always good to kind of figure out what those timelines are, what the historical context is, because you hear something like that, you're like 11th month, 12th year, or first day, like what is this referring to? So it's good to figure out what that's referring to, right? And so we covered that here already. Verse 2 says, Son of man, because Tyre has said of Jerusalem, aha, the gate to the nation is broken, and its doors have swung open to me. Now that she lies in ruins, I will prosper. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I am against you, Tyre, and I will bring many nations against you, like the sea casting up its waves. They will destroy the walls of Tyre and put down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. Interesting, right? So here God is prophesying that he's going to bring many nations against Tyre. So this prophecy gets, the cool thing about this prophecy is that it gets awfully specific, right? God is not just saying, you know, you're going to be destroyed, which is very vague and could be counted as prophecy if Tyre indeed does end up getting destroyed later off in history, right? And that would be good enough. But here he's even saying, sort of like one of the aspects of the manner that you're going to be destroyed is by many different nations coming against you, right? Which we do see happening historically, right? He says, I will bring many nations against you, Tyre, and I will bring many nations, and like it says, like the sea casting up its waves, right? So you know how you see waves come in one after the next. It's kind of like waves of attack on Tyre ultimately that he's referring to. And it says they will destroy her walls and pull down her towers, right? I will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. So the historical context for this is Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attempted to conquer Tyre, but could not fully destroy the island city after 13 years of siege. Later, Alexander the Great completed the conquest, fulfilling the prophecy of Tyre being overthrown and plundered. Right? So Nebuchadnezzar built up siege ramps against these guys. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, and sort of attacked the mainland. Now, Tyre is, a great empire at the time, and they have this sort of mainland thing going on, and they have this sort of side thing going on. They're like very well, sort of like navy type individual. They're very like versed at like having navy ships and like sort of running the waterways, and so they have the city, and then they have the walls around the city, but then they also have like their naval fleets, and they're able to sort of escape off to like sort of a side island or side islands in order to sort of maintain like their sort of combat strategy, or to hedge as an extra hedge against being destroyed. And you'll find out a little bit more. Let's just keep reading. We'll go through. That's why I'm saying this is kind of half baked, you know what I'm saying? Because really, I have, a little bit of context of who Tyre is, and, where they are, when this is happening historically and whatnot, a little later down. But I think we should get into it later. Let's continue reading through the prophecy a little bit better. Historically, the mainland is part of Tyre. Mainland part of Tyre was destroyed, and the island city was eventually leveled by Alexander. Stones from the ruin was used to build a causeway to the island, right? So let's read from verse 7, right? We already read. Oh, wait. We didn't read verse 5. Sorry, let's do that. Out of the sea, she will become a place to spread fish nets. For I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. She will become plunder for the nations, and her settlements on the mainland will be ravaged by the sword. Then will then they will know that I am the Lord. Right? So God is like really coming against Tyre here, but he's getting even more specific about the prophecy. Here he says that you know she will become a place to spread fish nets. That's interesting, like, sort of added note to sort of just put into the prophecy, getting a bit more specific. And it's really cool when you look through history and you see how this is sort of fulfilled. Oh man, I gotta say already off the jump, man, like, if you guys have never watched, there is a channel. I wish I had the channel's information right now, but I believe if you just YouTubed it and just looked at the battle between Alexander, where he's trying to take over Tyre, and look at the sort of long back and forth that's happening there, it gets pretty ham, bro. This stuff goes crazy, and there's some really good videos with little animations and stuff like that, and it shows you like where they would have retreated to, like how the fleets would have tried to, like, come in, how Alexander, crazy dude in history, bro, and like, he was like the war tactics and stuff like that. This stuff is really fascinating, bro. I mean, I'm a chess dude. I play chess, and these guys really like it. It's like chess times 100, bro. Like, these guys are really be playing chess for real in war, in battling, and all this type of stuff. A lot. In fact, I think you guys will find a lot of these battles, historical battles, very fascinating, very long, very grueling, very heroic, very like epic sort of adventures and like whatnot. These stories, I mean, it's always sad when there's wars, and it's always sad when people are dying and things like that, but it's always interesting to study the tactics of kings and, what I mean, great men of the past that have accomplished like incredible feats. This city, Tyre, is definitely one of the greatest cities, and under one of the greatest empire of the world at the time. And it was one of the most fortified city, and it was also some of the most clever tacticians that were out there. And so they were a stronghold. So God even coming and like prophesying against them that they're gonna fall, especially at the height of this empire. And in these times, it's it's very sort of impactful and meaningful, and it gives you, like, if someone was to say, hey man, like, I don't know, picture like some weak, like, country, oh, you guys are gonna get overran by, like, this nation or something like that. You could predict some of that. You could be like, hey, that's feasible. But let's say you're talking about a great and amazing nation. I don't know which one to say. And then you're talking about a nation that is totally disenfranchised, like the at the time, the Jewish people here, they're not like the Israelite people here, they're not necessarily in power. They're very like, so, this prophecy is gonna come through other nations, of course, but it does seem to be sort of an uphill feat to take down a nation of this magnitude at this time. And you're wondering how this is all gonna happen, and we'll get more into it. Let's read verse 7, from verse 7 anyways. Oh, historical context, I already said this or just now. It says the mainland part of Tyre was destroyed, and the island city was eventually leveled by Alexander. We said that before. Stones were of the ruins were used to make a causeway. We'll probably get into that a little bit more later into the video. From verse 7 it says, "For this is what the sovereign Lord says: From the north I am going to bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon." Very specific now, saying, okay, they're going to come from the north. It's specifically Nebuchadnezzar, and it's the king of Babylon. He's going to come against you, right? With horses and chariots and horsemen and a great army. He will ravage your settlements on the mainland with the sword. He will set up siege works against you, build up a ramp up to your walls, and raise his shields against you. Does it say shields? Yeah, shields against you. He will direct the blow of his battering rams against your walls and demolish your towers with his weapons. His horses will be so many, and they will cover you with dust. Your walls will tremble at the noise of the war horses, wagons, and chariots. When with at the noise of his war horses, wagons, and chariots, when he enters your gates, as men enter a city whose walls have been broken through. The hooves of his horses will trample all your streets. He will kill your people with the sword, and your strong pillars will fall to the ground. They will plunder your wealth and loot your merchandise. They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses and throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. I will put an end to your noisy songs and the music of your harps. I will, heart and the music of your harps will be heard no more. I will make you a bare rock, and you will become a place to spread fish nets. You will never be rebuilt, for I, the Lord, have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. So there's a lot going on here. He says you'll never be rebuilt. He talks about siege ramps being built up. He's getting very specific about what and how Nebuchadnezzar was going to do this type of stuff. Now, sieges in these days, if you guys are not familiar with the term, what a siege is normally when you want to conquer a city, especially a super fortified city with like massive walls and whatnot. You just set up camp around the city and you just wait it out. You know what I mean? You just kind of wait for a long time. Now, this is a 13-year process that happens. This is a historical account. So the fulfillment, this is the cool thing about this prophecy, is the fulfillment of the prophecy is seen within the a historical context, not necessarily in the Bible. So the prophecy is in the Bible, but then later off, all of this stuff actually does happen, and it happens with like an eerie similarity to what God says is going to happen. And we'll talk a little bit more about manuscripts and how early this stuff was, and whether we have manuscripts that predate the claim, and like how to interpret all of that, and if it matters at all, or whatever, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that just a little after. But he gets very specific with the war tactics that are going to be used against Tyre by Babylon. And here it says again this thing about becoming a place for fish nets, and then it talks about scraping away all the rubble, like making all the tearing down the houses and these things like that, breaking down the walls and all this type of stuff, and then scraping away everything and then throwing it into the sea. Very interesting stuff. Like, you know, again, you see prophecies where someone is gonna say something like, "Hey, this nation is gonna be destroyed," but getting that specific, like, and saying things like, and like, so what, like, someone is gonna scrape all the rubble that also from the city and then cast it into the sea. How's that gonna happen, right? I mean, we already sort of read the historical context that gives it away, but we'll talk more about it just now. All right. So you know, again, we talked about Nebuchadnezzar attacking for 13 years, and this is just on the mainland. Again, there's the mainland, and then there's the island, right? And so then we talk about Alexander the Great conquered the island city in about 332 BCE, so 332 years before, you know. So the prophecy here would have existed just around the same time, fulfilling the description of multinational forces and naval attacks, right? The city's debris was thrown into the sea, fulfilling the scrape dust into the water imagery. So, verse 15, let's see, wait, verse 15 to 21, we already read that, right? Yeah, I feel like we already read this. Let me just see. Okay, yeah, let's skip by that. That's good. So I had the same text, but you see what I'm saying? Fully half baked, no worries. Historical context. Tyre never regained its former glory after Alexander's conquest. Even centuries later, it was reduced to a minor fishing village, matching the prophecy's final sentiments, right? Ezekiel 28:2. Let's just read this for a second. It says, "Son of man, say to the ruler of Tyre, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In the pride of your heart, you say, I am a god. I sit on a throne of God in the hearts of the seas. But you are a mere mortal and not a god, though you think you are as wise as a god." So we see why this prophecy came against Tyre. I'm sure there's other reasons, but one of the reasons here is that this particular person has gotten puffed up. This is a thing that happens to Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible. This is the thing that happens to many great nations where people become so powerful, so elite, so well dominant and established in their position as like kings and leaders and like leading great nations and having lots of money. Now, this can happen to us in our personal lives, even if we like are doing well or being successful and stuff like that. And there's a layer here of Satan behind kings. If you guys didn't watch the video, Satan behind kings, this is amazing. That's an amazing connection, and it does make that connection here where Satan is kind of behind the king of Tyre, and then the Bible starts to talk to the king of Tyre as if he starts to talk to Satan through the king of Tyre or behind the king of Tyre ultimately. And if you remember the imagery of the reason Satan falls, it's this same idea. He becomes puffed up. He wants to sit on the throne of God. He wants to usurp the authority of God. He wants worship for himself, which is really what he's doing here on earth as well. So this prophecy has layers and, sort of scales to it that makes it even more fascinating and more interesting for sure. And the Bible be like that, and it is so fascinating. There's so much things going on at all times that you can discover, and sort of like fruits or morsel of meat that you can continue to strip away and eat and consume and grow in knowledge and whatnot, right? All right, so let's see. Ezekiel 28:2-10. Son of man, say to the ruler. Okay, wait. Let's you know what? Let's skip by that for a second, right? So this was under the Phoenician Empire, PHOENICIAN Empire. So if you guys want to look that up, you know what I mean, you'll see who the Phoenician people are and what the empire. The empire spans from about 2500 BCE before Christ to about 60 CE. So this empire lasted a little over 2500 years. This was a massive empire. The biblical prophecy was in the book of Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel was written by the prophet Ezekiel in Babylon during his exile, with the first dated message appearing in 593 BC, right? So 593 years before Christ is where we're seeing, sort of the first evidence of Ezekiel's sort of writings, right? Most scholars believe that the text has been expanded and edited by his followers over time, with the overall process likely concluding in the late 6th century BCE. So, about, let's say, I don't know, like late 6th century. So, this is again, mid to late 6th century writings from Ezekiel, even with the edits that would have been made later by Ezekiel's followers here, that scholars believe happened. And let's just be like kind of candid with how timelines work. So when you're looking at timelines in the scripture, a lot of times these scholars are giving a range, and the range is based on certain things. It's based on, so let's say Ezekiel is like established as the right author of this book, and we know that he dies after a certain time, then we know that it's in between a certain time. Now, there are things to validate that as well, because someone will say, well, yeah, so we know Ezekiel died before this time, so then he could have, but what about if someone else wrote it? Then, there's other ways to look at the text to verify whether or not. You look at who's historically held by and what their thoughts are on this. Like, is there evidence to the contrary? You also look at, like, whether or not, especially when it comes to historical writing, you look at certain claims in the text to see if it collaborates well, if it goes well with historical facts. For instance, if they're mentioning geography, or if they're mentioning kings and nations, like, are they getting the nations correct? Are they getting the kings correct? Are they getting the timelines correct? Are they getting the geography correct? Is the manuscripts like dated from within the certain that time period, like the animal hide, like, is the carbon dating sort of coinciding, like, and there's nuances here where someone could use a earlier hide and rub out stuff from it and then write in stuff onto it, and even that is, you're able to study that and see if there's layers and things like that. If this was used, was it done for a nefarious purpose, or was it just that someone is reusing this hide and then using it to write something else that's more important on it or whatnot? And so even like the types of writing, because certain writing is specific to certain age and time period and local areas, like we think of even names and things like that, we think of these things as like, here where I live in Toronto, you got like a Jamar living here and a Abdul living there, and you got like a Tom living here, and then you got a guy named, I don't know, Jokovic living there as well. You know what I'm saying? So you got like German names, you got like, regular Western names, you got, like a Middle Eastern names and stuff like that, all living in the same area. Not so much true for like a lot of historical accounts, although certain empires were like trading routes and things like that, and you have people passing through. You don't have like the same type of thing. Certain names are local to certain areas, certain tribes, certain groups and things like that. All of this stuff can be studied to deduce when is this from exactly? Even the type of inks that they would use to write, or the style of writing that they would use, even words that are used. You guys know within even our modern culture, there are words that are popped up and are being used. You got Gen Z type language, you got like, and so if you studying any era, you can see that there are things, markers, even within the words that are being used to determine the time period that something is from. There's lots and lots of criterias for this stuff. And so when you see these scholars saying, hey, like, you know, late 6th century, this is all, even with the edits, this is already done. There's a lot of work that goes into coming up with those numbers, and it's pretty robust history, essentially, right? The earliest manuscript witnesses for the prophecy against Tyre, which are found in the book of Ezekiel, includes the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, this is about 3rd to 1st century BC. Like, so around 1st to 3rd century BC is the earliest manuscripts that we have today. You know what I'm saying? And then let me continue to read this. Then and the Septuagint, a Greek translation from the last few centuries BC, with fragments like Codex Vaticanus, Vaticanus from 4th century, right? For the Hebrew text, the earliest extensive manuscripts are the Masoretic tradition, such as the Codex Aleppo, 10th century, and Codex Leningarden. What is it? Leningardensis. Leningardensis. I should have been knowing these, anyways. Whatever. From about that's about 1008, right? So like 10th century as well, 11th century. But the Dead Sea Scrolls provide significantly older evidence, right? So, this is one of the sort of like arguments against this entire prophecy. So the prophecy, we can see, is very specific. The prophecy we see fulfilled in history with like very specific. Maybe I should tell that story a little bit. Let me just kind of go through this, right? Like, yeah, there's multiple waves of attacks of nations that comes against Tyre, but most notably is the Nebuchadnezzar siege for that 13 years that we talked about, where he actually builds up siege ramps and he does all this stuff and he attacks the mainland. And so he does conquer the mainland. He breaks down their walls, he goes in, he kills people, he gets sort of like this victory, but it's not a complete victory because they take their naval ships and they kind of flee off to the island, the other thing, and they kind of make it. And so they're safe, but their city is completely done and ravaged, and like that's crushed. Now Nebuchadnezzar rolls back to where, and this stuff you can find in in history, essentially, right? And so he goes back, and he kind of goes back on a farce victory tip. So he's kind of he did win, but not really. He didn't defeat them. And then so later off, Alexander comes, Alexander the Great, and this guy then attacks. Same way, they do the same thing. They try to flee off to the side and try to run away, but Alexander is not satisfied. He wants to done this thing. So this guy scrapes all of the rubble, and he built something called the Alexander Causeway. So you guys can look this up. It actually is a walkway, sort of, where he throws the rubble into the sea, and he makes a sort of a walkway to go out to the island to then attack them, even on this sort of like side land thing that they had going on. And so Again, look up that battle and just kind of look. There's lots of aspects to these battles that kind of lend well to the prophecy, but it's just interesting in general. But the fact that God talks about the rubble being casted into the sea is crazy. Now, this is where the skeptics kind of get one in. You know what I'm saying? They get one in because then they're like, okay, well, it's very specific because it was written after. So they basically were writing this as prophecy as it was as it was unfolding, or they wrote it after all of this unfolded and then wrote it in as prophecy and then redacted the claim. Now, there's two problems notable with this suggestion. Now, yes, they're right that in the sense that the manuscript evidence, it seems to be from at least around the same time, sometimes later. So the earliest manuscripts that we have seems to be a little bit later than the actual events themselves, are roughly around the same times as the actual events themselves. Now, given a little great grace for range, right? We don't. It's hard to tell, and this creates a little bit of ambiguity. Now, ambiguity works for both of us, meaning that the person saying, "Hey, this could be a very true prophecy that we're seeing, and it could be written before." It lends validity to that claim because it cannot be debunked necessarily. Now, someone saying, "Well, no, it was written later," it also lends to that because that also cannot be debunked. You know what I mean? Because in truth, the earliest surviving manuscripts is that time, but surviving manuscripts usually indicate something older. So oftentimes a lot of this stuff is oral, that traditions that were going on before, where like Ezekiel was either preaching or getting revelation or teaching on this type of stuff, and or writing. And then the manuscripts that we have, surviving manuscripts, are usually from later, because what happens with those times is people were writing on things that were biodegradable. They didn't have the same type of technology that we had today. So what would happen is those things would degrade, and they would start to break down and sort of like just sort of rot away, kind of, right? And so you would rewrite those and copy down scrolls on later sort of scrolls, or like sort of papyri or whatever, animal hide and those type of things, right? And so that also kind of is a thing where, because you see these manuscripts existing from this time, you could say, well, it's evidence that this was already existing, and these earliest surviving, and believe it or not, these are very, very early manuscripts to the time of the event. There's really nothing else that's closer to it anyways, right? And so it is kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, well, it would be cool if we had manuscripts that existed prior to, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, so that way we could say, hey, we had this. And we do have this for some prophecies that we're gonna look at later off. We do have manuscripts that are earlier, sometimes hundreds of years prior to a specific fulfillment of that prophecy, and in some cases even like thousand, if not thousands of years earlier too, depending on how you look at that, right? And so let's see what else we got here. Tyre was not destroyed at once, but many times with significant destruction. Okay, we already went through that. Half baked again. So one of the major attacks on Tyre took place. Okay, yeah, we already went through that. So one of the sources for this stuff is Josephus. He's one of the guys that mentioned. So Josephus, in case you guys didn't know, is a first century uh, local historian from that time, and he's like one of the main authorities on these type of things. And this is what we talk about when we talk about source literature. Again, you've got historians looking at things from the past and then telling you, interpreting what happened, based on the things that they're looking at. But it's important to know what they're looking at, and why they interpret it that way. And so Josephus would have been one of those, what we call source literature, for things roughly from this time period and era. And even archaeology and things like that, like, are corroborating evidence that people are finding, and then they're able to use as support for some of the things that you see within history, for sure, right? And this is sort of written in, it's recorded in both the Antiquities of the Jews. It's a book X 228. You know what I mean? That might be the specific page that you can find it in, the specific book that you can find it in. And in the Against Appian, it says 156 to 159, right? So that's just the source for, the 13-year siege dram. That's one of them anyways, right? However, he dates the beginning of the siege to the 7th century, the 7th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, which is 598 slash 597. So late 6th century again, right? BC is where he's dating these events to. So wait a minute, hold on. So 5 something BC. Am I getting something confused here? 500 something years, so let's say 600 years before Christ. Okay, no, I'm not getting it confused. Our manuscripts are kind of a little bit around the same time, a little later, So our earliest manuscript, let me just look at that again. Where does it say? It says the earliest manuscript witness for the prophecy, which are found in the book of Ezekiel, includes the Dead Sea Scroll. So yeah, like 1st to 3rd century. So it's a couple hundred years later is where we have the earliest manuscript. But bear in mind, earlier here it's saying that about Ezekiel was written by the prophet Ezekiel in Babylon during his exile, with the first dated message appearing in about late 6th century. So it's talking about 593 year BC. So the prophecy would have been occurring at the same time, and the earliest manuscript we have is from a couple centuries after, right? And so yeah, and that's, again, we're being honest with ourselves. I won't lie to you guys, when I started this, I was really hoping that we had earlier surviving manuscripts, and I found out that we didn't, and I figured I would share it with you guys anyways, and we could be honest about it. I've been accused of being super sort of I don't know, like lenient to the Christian side and super like against other faith group side. So just in full disclosure, I wanted to say that, look, a skeptic kind of got us here if they want to say that, like, okay, well, your earliest surviving manuscripts of the prophecy is from later, so then that could have been invented later, not actually shows that that would show that this is not an actual prophecy, but them writing it after the time. The second thing I wanted to say about that too is, a part of that too is kind of, if you already don't believe in prophecies, or you're just super skeptical about the Bible. Now, if you believe, you can believe that, yeah, God can give prophecies. And if you look at the scope of everything that God is doing in scripture, and like some of the other prophecies, you can you can deduce that, yeah, this is not something that's totally impossible, like, or hard for God to do at all. And so you already approach it with the belief that, yeah, this is very possible and whatnot. So if you're a skeptic and you're thinking about this totally skeptically, then you have to believe that they're sort of inventing this. Now, there is sort of a problem with that, is you kind of can't do that. Like, so picture today, right? Me making prophecies and being like, "Oh, Donald Trump is gonna win the 2024 elections," right? And I'm doing that now in 2025, and it'll be like, yeah, doc, everybody and their moms will know that I didn't have this prophecy like from before, and it'll be totally debunked. It'll be talked about in like right from around the time you'll see news anchors and people popping up or whoever like critiquing Dale. Yo, he says that he prophesied this before it happened, but he didn't. There's no evidence of him doing it earlier. And so, historically it seems very weird that that would be the thing, that like they were sort of writing this after. It seems like this is something that was already set in stone and it was already written before, and then later all these fulfillments happen, and it's more congruent with sort of the way that you see things there. Now, again, without the actual manuscript evidence from earlier, it's going to be difficult for us to argue that case, but you know what I mean. It is something, sort of a logical sort of way of looking at it. And then again, like, if you already believe that God is able to do this and he has done this and this is something, it's not very hard for you to make that leap and say, well, this is possible. And again, you don't have to claim that for sure this is a prophecy. I would say in my context, I believe that for sure it's an earlier prophecy, because I just know God, I know the Bible, and like I know, I'm saying these things. But me arguing to someone, I can't really fully argue that, hey, for sure this is a prophecy. Now, of course, the fulfillment of this prophecy through Alexander later off in history is kind of conclusive, though. So we already had earlier evidence prior to Alexander coming, right? So Alexander doing what he did. So we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar, right? So when would this have been? So in that aspect, we have earlier surviving manuscripts, right? So when would it have? Let's see. Alexander the Great built a causeway into the island city of Tyre in 332 BC during the 7-month siege to conquer it. His army constructed a 1 kilometer long bridge using timber and debris from the mainland, building a natural sandbar that was submerged just a few meters below the water's surface. Alrighty, so I take it back. So Alexander the Great is getting a little closer now, because we're talking about the causeway being built in 332, right? And we're talking about 3rd to 1st century surviving manuscripts. So, I mean, give or take, right? And I don't know what you guys want to do with that information, but definitely a really cool prophecy to look at. Definitely super interesting stuff from the Bible for our first prophecy that we're looking at. And I think these are a lot of useful tools that we went through in this video with regards to how to look at history and with regards to what you want to look for when you're looking at prophecies and these type of things. So we're talking 6th century. The Phoenician Empire, I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So like, who were the Phoenicians and like what were they and whatnot? They were like this massive trading group. You know what I mean? I don't want to read too much. You guys know Jezebel from the Bible. Apparently, she was a Phoenician princess, right? And so Tyre is an ancient Phoenician city located at the coast of the modern day Lebanon. So where Phoenicia would have been at that time, where the Phoenician Empire would have been, or Tyre would have been, sorry, in the Phoenician Empire, is where we know as Lebanon today, right? It's an extensive trade network of luxury goods like Tyrian purple dye. Now, believe it or not, purple dye was mad expensive at that time. You know, when Jesus talked about, you know, the rich man and Lazarus, and he talks about the rich man wearing purple linen all the time. Linen was super crazy. It was like worth its weight in gold at the time. It was like its weight, you know, its weight in gold at the time. So it was like very expensive stuff. And he was also, it was purple. So, like, you know, historical context really brings these scriptures to life, and you get to understand more about what Jesus was really saying. And so Phoenicians were known for creating this purple dye as well, and a lot of other stuff, timber and all this type of stuff. They were like an extensive trade route. It says during the existence of the Phoenician civilization, 1550 to 300 BCE. Other major powers included Neo-Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Babylon. You know what? We don't care. I was just going to tell you guys of like other surrounding empires around the area, just to give us a little bit more context. Yeah, you know what? I got some other notes here, but let me just do a quick wrap up. We got like, what, 3 minutes? Hopefully I can wrap this up in 3 minutes before that 1 hour mark. I don't know, man. Let me know what you guys think of this video. Critique me, if you will. I do feel like I didn't really deliver on this one. I do think there are some cool nuggets in there. Just to sort of recap, we see this crazy prophecy in about Tyre in Ezekiel 26. It kind of leads into spiritual matters of Satan, who's ultimately behind the king of Babylon, which is super fascinating. We see this idea of the specificity of the prophecy, of like the fact that things were sort of scraped away from the mainland, many nations coming against this one nation, and like this massively powerful empire being overthrown. And then, you know, the idea of the debris from the mainland being casted into the sea, which is like really crazy and specific as well, and the causeway built by Alexander the Great. But we also see this idea of, you know, us not being able to say, hey, we have manuscripts that predate the actual fulfillment of the prophecy. And although I think we have some really cool tools there to think about how history is done, to think about manuscripts. We talked about the fact that, you know, manuscripts, earlier surviving manuscripts, like later surviving manuscripts, are usually evidence of earlier manuscripts that would have existed, right? And probably are oral traditions that would have existed prior to. And we got to be a little bit honest about this prophecy here and think about it from both a skeptic lens and a Christian lens. And I don't know, I'm fascinated by this stuff. I think it's super interesting. I think it's a really cool prophecy, especially if you're a Christian and you believe that God can and does do this, and very well potentially did do it. I'm just being a little bit careful about how I'm using my words, because I do want to lend to an atheist or a skeptic of Christianity or of like the validity of the scripture and whatnot, to be able to say, well, yeah, but you know, it's not really conclusive, at least for me as a skeptic, because, you know, your earlier surviving manuscripts don't do the thing for me. Anyways, I hope y'all enjoyed that video. I'm going to try to get out of here before that 1 hour mark hits. And so, yeah, man. Encourage your boy, like, share the video, comment, whatever, you know what I'm saying? If I made any mistakes and whatnot throughout, pray for your boy. Continue to work with me. I'm going to continue to think about these things and refine. And we're going to continue to look at other prophecies later off. We're going to look at like apparent failed prophecies even of the text and try to like work through, how we rectify those as well. Anyway, God bless. I got seconds to get out of here.